No refrigeration, no preservatives, no second chances. Out there in the wilderness, fresh meat spoiled in hours, not days. A successful hunt could feed a man for weeks, or it could rot and leave him starving if he didn't know the ancient art of preservation. They needed techniques that could turn fresh kill into food that would last for months. They needed methods that worked with nothing but fire, salt, and knowledge passed down through generations. They needed skills that meant the difference between feast and famine in the unforgiving wilderness. Every cut mattered. One wrong technique, one failed preservation attempt, one spoiled batch, and a mountain man could lose his only source of protein for hundreds of miles. The men who survived decades in the wilderness had mastered jerky-making techniques that were more sophisticated than most modern methods. Skills that could preserve meat perfectly, using only what nature provided. Today, we're exploring the ancient art of wilderness jerky-making, techniques that kept mountain men alive when fresh food meant survival. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. For over 200 years, mountain men perfected jerky-making techniques that could preserve meat in any weather condition using only natural materials and primitive tools. These weren't the simple drying methods found in modern survival guides. These were sophisticated preservation systems that could create jerky that was safer, more nutritious, and longer lasting than most commercial alternatives. The hunt and the cut, selecting and preparing the perfect meat. The morning mist rises from the valley floor as mountain man Jeremiah Stone field dresses the elk he brought down with a single shot from his Hawken rifle. But the real work is just beginning. In the wilderness, the difference between a successful hunt and a survival disaster isn't the kill. It's what happens in the crucial hours that follow. The meat selection process was the foundation of quality jerky, and mountain men understood that not all cuts were created equal. The best jerky came from the lean muscle groups that had the right texture and fat content for proper preservation. The backstrap, eye of round, and bottom round provided the ideal combination of leanness and grain structure that would dry evenly and resist spoilage. The timing was absolutely critical. Fresh meat had to be processed within hours of the kill to prevent bacterial growth that could ruin the entire batch. Mountain men worked with the urgency of men who understood that delay meant death. They had no margin for error in an environment where spoiled meat could mean starvation hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement. The cutting technique was an art form that took years to master. Mountain men used razor-sharp knives to slice meat with the grain in strips that were exactly the right thickness, about a quarter inch. Too thick, and the meat wouldn't dry properly, leading to spoilage in the center. Too thin, and it would become brittle and lose nutritional value. The cuts had to be uniform to ensure even drying across the entire batch. The fat removal process was meticulous and essential. Any fat left on the meat would turn rancid during the drying process, ruining the entire batch and potentially causing dangerous food poisoning. Mountain men used their knives like surgical instruments, removing every trace of fat, sinew, and connective tissue that could compromise the preservation process. The grain direction was crucial for creating jerky that would be both tender and durable. Mountain men learned to read the muscle structure of different animals, understanding how to cut with or against the grain, depending on the desired texture and intended use. Jerky cut with the grain was tougher, but lasted longer. Jerky cut against the grain was more tender, but had to be consumed sooner. The portioning system ensured that each piece would dry at the same rate. Mountain men cut strips that were similar in size and thickness, understanding that inconsistent pieces would create uneven drying that could lead to spoilage. They also considered how the jerky would be packed and transported, cutting pieces that would fit efficiently in their gear without breaking. The initial preparation included removing any damaged or questionable meat that could contaminate the entire batch. Mountain men inspected every piece with the eye of men whose lives depended on the quality of their food preservation. They understood that one bad piece could spoil an entire batch, potentially leaving them without protein for weeks. This cutting and preparation process was the foundation of successful jerky making. Mountain men who mastered these techniques could turn any fresh kill into high-quality preserved meat that would sustain them through the harshest conditions. The skills required understanding anatomy, food safety, and preservation science that was passed down through generations of wilderness survival. The ancient art of seasoning, salt, smoke, and secret ingredients. The afternoon sun beats down on the makeshift drying racks as Stone carefully applies his seasoning mixture to each strip of elk meat. This isn't just about flavor, it's about creating a chemical environment that will preserve the meat for months while providing the nutrition needed for wilderness survival. The salt application was the most critical element of the preservation process. Mountain men understood that salt didn't just add flavor, it drew moisture from the meat and created an environment hostile to the bacteria that caused spoilage. But the amount had to be precise. Too little salt and the meat would spoil. Too much and it would become inedible and could cause dangerous dehydration. The salt sources varied depending on location and availability. In some regions, mountain men could obtain refined salt through trade with Native Americans or supply expeditions. In remote areas, they learned to extract salt from natural sources, salt licks, mineral springs, and even certain plants that concentrated salt in their tissues. The quality and type of salt affected both the preservation process and the final flavor. The application technique ensured even distribution and proper penetration. Mountain men rubbed salt into every surface of the meat, working it into the grain and ensuring complete coverage. They understood that any area missed by salt could become a point of spoilage that would ruin the entire piece. The salt had to penetrate deep into the meat to be effective. The smoking process added another layer of preservation while creating the distinctive flavor that made Mountain Man jerky legendary. The smoke contained natural preservatives that inhibited bacterial growth while adding compounds that enhanced both flavor and nutritional value. But the type of wood used was crucial. Different woods provided different preservation properties and flavors. The wood selection was based on availability and preservation properties. Hickory provided strong preservation compounds and a robust flavor. Oak burned slowly and provided consistent smoke. Fruit woods like apple and cherry added subtle flavors while contributing preservation compounds. Mountain men avoided woods that contained harmful resins or produced bitter smoke that could make the jerky inedible. The smoking technique required understanding fire management and airflow control. Mountain men built fires that produced steady smoke without excessive heat that would cook the meat rather than dry it. They controlled the smoking process through careful fuel selection, fire positioning, and airflow management that ensured consistent results. The natural additives enhanced both preservation and nutrition. Mountain men learned from Native Americans about plants and spices that could improve jerky quality. Wild garlic provided antimicrobial properties. Certain berries added vitamins and antioxidants. Herbs like sage and thyme contributed preservation compounds while improving flavor. The timing of seasoning application was critical for proper preservation. Salt had to be applied immediately after cutting to begin the moisture extraction process. Smoking had to begin at the right stage of drying to be effective. Mountain men developed timing systems based on weather conditions, meat thickness, and desired final texture. This seasoning and smoking process transformed simple meat preservation into an art form that created jerky with superior flavor, nutrition, and shelf life. Mountain men who mastered these techniques could create preserved meat that was not just edible, but actually enjoyable to eat during long wilderness expeditions. The drying process, wind, sun, and perfect timing. The evening air carries the rich aroma of smoking meat, as Stone checks his drying racks for the third time today. The jerky making process has reached its most critical phase, the careful balance of heat, airflow, and timing that will determine whether his week's worth of protein becomes perfectly preserved jerky or spoiled waste. The rack construction was a crucial element that mountain men perfected through years of trial and error. The racks had to provide maximum airflow around each piece of meat while protecting it from insects, rain, and contamination. Mountain men built racks using available materials, branches, sinew, and rawhide that could be assembled quickly and transported easily when they moved camp. The positioning strategy maximized drying efficiency while minimizing spoilage risk. Racks were positioned to take advantage of prevailing winds that would carry moisture away from the meat. They were elevated to prevent ground moisture and positioned to receive maximum sunlight during peak drying hours. The orientation could be adjusted throughout the day to optimize drying conditions. The airflow management was critical for preventing the stagnant air conditions that led to spoilage. Mountain men understood that moving air was essential for proper drying, and they positioned their racks to create natural convection currents that would continuously circulate fresh air around the meat. They also learned to read wind patterns and adjust their setup accordingly. The temperature control required understanding the relationship between heat, humidity, and drying rates. Too much heat would cook the meat rather than dry it, creating a product that spoiled quickly. Too little heat would allow bacterial growth before the meat dried sufficiently. Mountain men learned to maintain the ideal temperature range through careful fire management and rack positioning. The moisture monitoring was an art form that required experience and intuition. Mountain men could tell by touch, appearance, and even sound whether meat was drying properly. They knew the signs of proper drying, the texture changes, color development, and flexibility that indicated successful preservation. They also recognized the warning signs of spoilage that required immediate action. The weather adaptation techniques allowed jerky making in any conditions. Mountain men learned to work with rain, humidity, temperature fluctuations, and other weather challenges that could ruin a batch of jerky. They developed methods for protecting drying meat from moisture while maintaining airflow, and techniques for accelerating drying when weather conditions were unfavorable. The timing calculations ensured that meat dried completely without overprocessing. Under-dried jerky would spoil quickly, while over-dried jerky became brittle and lost nutritional value. Mountain men learned to judge the perfect drying time based on meat thickness, weather conditions, and intended storage duration. This timing was critical for creating jerky that would last for months. The quality control process involved constant monitoring and adjustment throughout the drying period. Mountain men checked their jerky multiple times per day, rotating pieces for even drying, removing any that showed signs of spoilage, and adjusting conditions as needed. This attention to detail was essential for producing consistently high-quality preserved meat. This drying process was where mountain men's expertise truly showed. The ability to create perfectly dried jerky under any conditions was a skill that separated successful wilderness survivors from those who starved despite having access to fresh meat. The techniques required understanding physics, chemistry, and biology that was gained through years of life or death experience. The final product: storage, transport, and wilderness nutrition. The morning sun illuminates the finished jerky as Stone carefully inspects each piece before packing it for the long journey ahead. After 3 days of careful processing, he has transformed 50 pounds of fresh elk into 12 pounds of perfectly preserved jerky that will sustain him through months of wilderness travel. The quality assessment was the final test that determined whether the jerky-making process had been successful. Properly made jerky had a specific texture, flexible but not soft, dry but not brittle. It should crack slightly when bent but not break completely. The color should be dark and uniform, with no signs of mold or discoloration that indicated spoilage. The storage preparation ensured that jerky would remain fresh during extended wilderness expeditions. Mountain men wrapped jerky in clean cloth or leather that allowed air circulation while protecting it from moisture and contamination. They understood that proper storage was just as important as proper preparation for maintaining jerky quality over time. The packing techniques maximized portability while protecting the jerky from damage. Mountain men developed methods for packing jerky that prevented breaking and crumbling while minimizing weight and bulk. They created containers and wrapping systems that could withstand the rough handling of wilderness travel while keeping the jerky accessible for daily consumption. The nutritional understanding that mountain men possessed was remarkably sophisticated for their era. They knew that jerky provided concentrated protein, essential amino acids, and minerals that were crucial for wilderness survival. They understood that properly made jerky retained most of the nutritional value of fresh meat while being much more portable and shelf-stable. The consumption strategies maximized the nutritional and energy benefits of jerky during wilderness expeditions. Mountain men knew how to ration jerky to provide sustained energy throughout the day. They understood which activities required more protein and how to combine jerky with other foods to create complete nutrition in challenging environments. The shelf life expectations were based on years of experience with different preservation methods and storage conditions. Properly made jerky could last for months without refrigeration, providing reliable protein during extended wilderness expeditions. Mountain men learned to judge how long jerky would remain safe and nutritious under different storage conditions. The trade value of high-quality jerky made it a valuable commodity in the wilderness economy. Mountain men who could produce superior jerky could trade it for other essential supplies, ammunition, and equipment. The quality of a man's jerky was often a measure of his wilderness skills and reliability as a partner or guide. The emergency applications of jerky went beyond simple nutrition. In survival situations, jerky could be ground into powder and mixed with water to create a nutritious soup. It could be combined with fat and berries to create pemmican, an even more concentrated survival food. These applications made jerky an essential component of wilderness survival strategy. "Good jerky is worth its weight in gold out here," explained mountain man Hugh Glass in 1823. A man with quality jerky can travel farther, work harder, and survive longer than one who depends on fresh meat alone. The legacy of mountain man jerky making techniques continues to influence modern food preservation methods. Their understanding of the relationship between salt, smoke, airflow, and timing created preservation methods that were more effective than many modern alternatives. These techniques represent centuries of accumulated knowledge about transforming fresh meat into safe, nutritious, long-lasting food using only natural materials and primitive tools. The mastery of jerky making was one of the essential skills that separated successful mountain men from those who perished in the wilderness. It required understanding chemistry, biology, and physics that was gained through practical experience and passed down through generations of wilderness survivors. In our modern world of refrigeration and preservatives, these ancient techniques remind us of the incredible knowledge and skill required to survive and thrive in challenging environments using only what nature provides. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America.